Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Be water, my friend.
Welcome, guys. I'm here at the Functional Training Summit in Munich with none other than Stuart McGill, who everyone here is crazy about. And I have to admit, before I didn't really know your work, like before the summit. And then they were telling me about you, and I did some research. And now here, I'm very impressed because the experts, which I consider experts, they would tell me, hey, you need to meet Stuart. He is a Koryphäe in German, a Koryphäe legend. And well, maybe without giving too much away but when people ask you, what do you do, and they don't know what you do, how do you respond? What do you say?
I usually say I'm a plumber, because if I say I'm a professor of spine biomechanics, they tell me about their grandmother's back pain.
Okay, fair.
Actually, I to be straight for a minute, I'm a professor of spine biomechanics at the University of Waterloo in Canada. We run several different laboratories. One is where we take real spines and we create the injuries. So we create disc herniations, end plate fractures, torn ligaments, etc. So we define quite precisely the mechanical scenarios that lead to those specific injuries, so we know what to prevent and that kind of thing. The other lab is set up to measure real people doing activities. So we measure their muscle activation levels, their spine movements, etc., and then use computer modeling to then look inside and determine things like where are the stress points in their spines and in the rest of their linkages. We measure things like spine stability. And then we look at whole linkage mechanics. So how come someone can hit a golf ball 400 yards? Then the third part is the clinic. So people fly in from around the world with back pain, and they are the worst of the worst, the lowest functioning backs, and also the best of the best, some elite athletes of many different sports. And we try and work with them, measure what's going on, understand their pain mechanism, but we also get insight into the mechanisms that allow them to do things athletically that no one else can. So it's an interesting blend of investigation and intervention as well, working with them to A, get rid of their pain, and B, restore their performance.
Do you have a preferred sport or like sort of athlete that you work with in that sense? Are there more like types that are more interesting to you than others? Yeah,
there certainly are, but it doesn't mean I like them anymore. I'll give you an example. Right now, I've worked with quite a number of some top MMA fighters, okay, which in one respect is awful to think that these athletes are working to really damage one another, and they do. I'm wondering why am I helping this? Well, they're going to do it anyway. But in terms of working with them, as you know, in athletics, everything is a trade-off. If you want an endurable athlete, you ruin their explosiveness. You can't train both. They're two completely different metabolisms. If you want an explosive athlete, you can't have endurance. If you want spine flexibility, you decrease the ability to bear load. So you can't mix up a lot of yoga and deadlifts, for example. That's a recipe for back pain. So you can't have all of these things. You have to pick the optimums for the athlete. So the MMA fighter, for me, is one of the biggest challenges to build, because they need to be endurance athletes, because the rounds are 5 minutes. But they need to be very, very explosive for escaping submission holds and delivering strikes and that kind of thing. They have to be very resilient physically and take a lot of abuse. They have to be very flexible, and yet they have to deliver very high loads and do lifts of bodies and whatnot. So in terms of building that optimum and blend of all these athleticisms, that's probably my biggest challenge versus, say, a hockey player or a soccer player or an Olympic sprinter, where you don't have to worry about the endurance. You're building training capacity. It's 9 seconds of ultimate effort, and much more unidimensional in what we're trying to build. So,
how about basketball? Because I'm a basketball player.
Right. Well, we've done some work with some top-level basketball players and teams, as you know. And it's interesting, some of the things we've discovered. You know, as a basketball player, the American NFL football players have a standard test at the beginning of the season called the Combine. The NBA has a Combine. The NHL, the hockey players have a Combine. And I've measured them all. And the basketballers have the most content-valid Combine. In other words, the people who do really well in the football Combine very rarely are good players in the NFL. But it's quite opposite in basketball. So, for example, one of the tests that really predicts a good basketball player is the NBA lane shuffle test. Mm-hmm. And we know that great basketball players have a very competent drop step. So if I was to stand up for just a minute, a drop step is that. So that's a fundamental move in tennis. Say, if I'm moving that way for a forehand, it's a drop step. Drop hand to a back. So the lateral shuffle and the drop step in the NBA is correlated with scoring lots of baskets. Wow. But then there are things like grip strength, for example. As strength coaches, you have to be careful what you ask for sometimes, because the guys who are the rebound specialists. You think, are they the tall fellas, really strong? Well, interestingly, they tend to have a good bench press score. Mm-hmm. They have a wide wingspan, tip to tip on their fingers, and a weaker grip strength. So the finesse of the ball around the basket may not be strength. It may be other motor control skills. So sometimes when you measure these things, there's a lot of surprises. Wow. But it hones you in on what you're looking for out of those elite players and what you might want to develop. But anyway, there's a few thoughts on basketball, but the Combine of the NBA is one of the more content-valid ones around.
It's really interesting. I've never heard. We had one coach actually who wanted to make us better rebounders and had us hang at this, from a bar. To get our arms longer. So at the end now it made sense, because the wingspan, if it really helps increase your wingspan.
Well, again, we all have these ideas on tests, but these tests should always have a test of validity. So go do that with half the team and then not with the other half of the team, and then test it. Did you change the output of the players who did that exercise? So that's always the final validation of any of these interventions. We all have great ideas, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, you were saying that you stick very much to your science, and that you, because that would have been a question of mine, who do you look up to or who do you follow? And you said before the interview, you focus on science. You have your method and you have your data. And can you tell me that story? How did you come up with collecting that data and developing your method?
Well, it's going to be perceived as very arrogant by some of your viewers, I'm sure, but I was asked yesterday, do you follow so-and-so's work? And the answer is, I really don't follow anybody. I try and ask the most difficult questions, sometimes the questions that other people are afraid to ask, and I'll design the experiment to get insight into that, and then I follow what the science shows. So I don't really follow a lot of other people who are selling a particular test or a certain way of doing things. I'd much rather get a population of athletes and measure it myself and come to my own conclusions.
I don't think that's arrogant at all. Quite the opposite, actually. I think this is the right method to go after, because I think, especially in my world and in the biohacking field, I think oftentimes people become these gurus, and whatever they say becomes science in a way. And so sometimes you have to take a step back and really look at the data and the science. Yeah. And so I totally like that. Now, you were talking about professional athletes. Now I want to shift towards the average person. Because actually I discovered myself in some of the things you said, especially I would do a deadlift and then yoga after, and I just rang the bell. I said, okay, that might not be the best thing. So for the average person, should they choose either to build muscle or do yoga, but they can't do both? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, very much so. The method should be this, is what we've found to be the most effective and associated with the greatest, most resilient athletes. You should know what is required to play the sport. So you catalog the sport. Your position in basketball, for example, know how important is lateral shuffle versus forward, backward movement, jumping, and is it a standing vertical jump or is it a 2-foot planting of the heel, fly through the air, Michael Jordan type of jump? All of these things have very different mechanics. So know what the sport demands. Then assess the athlete for those variables that are important to the sport. So, for example, I'll take NHL hockey players. Years ago, they used to test the hockey player, how far can you run in 10 minutes? The coaches thought this was a good idea, and I'd ask some of the coaches, what's the correlation between how far you can run in 10 minutes and how many pucks you put in the net? And they said, well, we don't know. We've never tested it. And I said, well, I think you better test that. As it turned out, the 10-minute run identified the high VO2 max, slow and durable athlete, not the explosive one. So when you look at the great European players and some of the Russian players, they are on the ice for 45 seconds. They're anaerobic monsters. They are absolutely explosive athletes, and then they get off very quickly. They have the worst 10-minute run time and the furthest standing vertical jump. So give me the hockey player with the furthest standing vertical jump, or horizontal jump, pardon me, and the poorest 10-minute run time, because there's your explosive 45-second NHL star.
Wow.
So, you got to be careful what you're after. But now you've assessed what the sport needs. Now you assess the athlete, and you start to train the difference a little bit. So if they need more explosive power, don't pollute your training program with traditional things that may or may not be enhancing that athleticism. But, of course, my world, every person who comes to see me has a back issue. So I have to rebuild their athleticism, or if we're just talking about an average person, rebuild their ability to enjoy a pain-free life, but we have to do it in a way that's sparing their spine. Mm-hmm. So to go back to your deadlift and yoga example, you're mixing up two things. So to be a good deadlifter means you have to build a body that's resilient for axial load. The collagen, the fibers that make up the disc of your spine, have to be stiffened in order to bear high load. When you do yoga, you soften the matrix that holds the collagen together. So next time you put high load on it and repeatedly bend it, the nucleus will start to put pressure on the collagen fibers, and they'll slowly delaminate and open up. So you just created the perfect storm. You created laxity between the layers of collagen in your discs through yoga, and then you're asking it to bear high load. You can't do that. So the great grand masters of powerlifting, they can't even tie their shoe. But don't worry about it. That's what allows them to bear hundreds of kilos of load down their back. But and I'll give you another little example as well about matching the programming to a particular athletic body form. So I'm just looking at the width of your elbows here and the width of your knees, and I'm looking at the size of your skeleton. If you take a slender branch, you can bend it back and forth. There's no stress, there's no problem. But if you take a thicker branch and bend it to the same amount, it will shatter. So if I take a heavy rugby player with a heavy frame and get them to do sit-ups, they actually herniate their discs much sooner than the slender person. Mm-hmm. So a slender spine can take a lot of bending, but they won't survive, training to be a shot putter or a big rugby player. Or do you see why you have to now match? So if you want to do yoga, choose a person who's thin-boned, small-jointed, and they may do very well, but they won't win at powerlifting, and they shouldn't be doing deadlifts. So choose the exercise, and then choose the package and the program of exercises that are all building together to create the optimal blend of injury resiliency and athleticism. Mm-hmm. Mix them up and you'll have an injured athlete.
That also brings me to Kelly Starrett, who I've met at the biohacking conference in Los Angeles, and he does a lot with softening up tissue loosening up tissue. And he seems to be very flexible. He's a big guy. I don't know if you know how he looks like.
Oh, I know Kelly well.
Yeah, but
We share a few athletes.
that's what I assumed. No, I was very sure that actually you guys were pretty close. But he's super flexible, and he has the story in his book actually where he says that he went to a yoga class. He never does yoga though, but the yoga instructor was really impressed with his flexibility. So is it that an athlete like that, who's thick-boned and strong, can still be flexible, but with other methods?
There absolutely are exceptions and gifts all the time. It's a mistake to look at one athlete and say, well, there's the model. I'm going to train all my other athletes for that, because if they chose their parents right, they'll survive. But a lot of athletes aren't so lucky. So I've given you my opinions on that. That's consistent with our science. So that's what I have to stay with.
So now I would be interested in what is your process when you first meet a person to evaluate or to say what they should do?
Right. Well, as I said, they all come with the background of back pain or a back injury history. So the first thing I do is just talk to them freely, and I want them to express to me what their biggest concerns are. And I'm starting to weigh all those answers that they give me. What priority are they putting on things? How emotional are they about all of this and that kind of thing? And then I get into the physical testing, and the first thing I do, and by the way, I watch them move. I ask them to take their shoes off for no other reason that I want to see what movement patterns do they use to take their shoes off. They're revealing to me their movement habits. So people, they might pass a movement test, but it doesn't show me what their movement habits are, how they brush their teeth, get on and off the toilet, and these kinds of things, how they sit. That will show me where the chronic stresses are on their back and why they have back pain. But then I formalize what we call provocative testing. So I will put loads in compression, shear. I will bend them. I might put them under traction loads. I might put them into an endurance posture. I'm probing their back, trying to create the pain. When I create the pain, now I understand the mechanism of what's causing their pain. Immediately, I then try and take it away. So if I can show you, I'll give you an example. So if I created an axial load on my back, I'm going to say I'm not going to have any activity here at all, and I'm just going to go up and bounce on my heels. Boom. There's 1.5 times body weight. A back pain person might say, oh, there's no pain. Or they might say, oh, I just got pain in my right heel, showing me they've trapped the nerve root at L5. And then I'll say, good, push my fingers out. Don't push out this way, push out laterally. There is a bracing pattern. Perfect. Now hold that and do it. And they'll say, oh, you just took my pain away. So I've understood the mechanism of pain. Now I understand they've got a micro movement there. I can put on a muscular brace and take their pain away. Or the third scenario might occur. They'll say, oh, my pain is worse now. They don't tolerate the compressive load of that brace. So then I'll say, externally rotate, pull down with your pecs and lats, pull down this way, now bump on your heels. And they'll say, oh yeah, that took my pain away. So I'm searching for different strategies in their body to create the pain and then take it away. So now I'm learning what I need to create to make them pain-free and able to start training again. Mm-hmm. So there might just be an example of a pain provocation test and how I seek to find a program right away that I can start them off, and then just build progressions. We will build a little bit of movement patterns so they know how to brush their teeth without triggering pain. Then we build a bit more core stability and core control. Then we free their hips to allow hip mobility so they don't need to bend their spine. Then a walking program is non-negotiable, and we stylistically might change the way that they walk and the intervals to guarantee that they don't break into pain while they're walking. And then finally, we've built a pain-free foundation, and then we expand into movement patterns like a push pattern, a pull pattern. And then, you mentioned people like Kelly Starrett. He would agree with that last part, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there's some commonalities and there's some dissimilarities with different programs, but again, I'm the guy who's responsible for people with back pain. And that was the purpose of that book, by the way.
Yeah.
For the
what is it called in English, by the way?
back mechanic. And as you know, I've written a number of textbooks for clinicians, for the docs and the physios and the trainers, on how to deal with people with back pain. And it's the same approach: assess their pain triggers, understand them, then show the patient how to avoid their pain triggers, which neurologically allows them to desensitize the pain trigger. Very important. Before you give them back exercises, wind down the sensitivity so not everything hurts. Mm-hmm. That's the missing link in a lot of back programs. And then build a very wise program that will give them more stability, a bit more hip mobility, walking, and go through the program as I just described. But that book was the hardest book I've ever written, to find the magic blend for the lay person, because the back publishers wanted me to write a book, 5 easy steps to fix back pain. And I said, that's a lie. That doesn't exist. If you buy a book like that, guarantee you will fail, because there aren't 5 easy steps. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a slight different genesis or mechanism to their back pain, and you have to tune your approach to that particular pain causation. So it took me about 4 years to write that and rewrite it to try and get the minimum amount of information, but still be true and valid in telling the truth, that there's actually 17 chapters in there to step the person through, so they understand their pain triggers and learn how to engineer them out of their body. And it's fun coming to Germany, actually, because the world considers the Germans as the best engineers in the world. And yet when it comes
to... Well?
Yeah, sure I do. Look at the cars, and I love the technology and the motorbikes. And I'm a bit of a motorhead, a horsepower freak, so of course I love the engineering. But it seems when they're engineering a body and the linkage, the docs are saying, oh, well, we'll look at an MRI picture, as if that's going to show us the pain. Does a beautiful car engineer or a car mechanic look at a picture of the car and tell you what's wrong? No, they have to drive it and tune it, and tune the suspension to the horsepower on that particular day. And that's going to change with heat and the weather and all of these things. So we have to do the same thing with the bodies when we're assessing them, so we know how to tune them. But I now I'm at a meeting like this at Perform Better Europe, showing the trainers how they have the best opportunity, because they work with movement, and they can assess their clients for their pain triggers and movement patterns. They can become the best tuners of the body to take out the pain generators and get good, efficient movement.
By the way, that just reminded me of that sentence by this mathematician, Pascal, who said, I'm sorry that I wrote you such a long letter, but I didn't have the time to write you a shorter one. That's just because it takes a long time to break something down into the minimum amount of content that you need to help a person.
Yeah, that was a very big challenge for me.
And
they tell me I've got it right, though.
So now, and there are actually 2 questions. First of all, who are the ones that really should read this book? And maybe tied to that, what is something very frequent that you see that people generally do wrong and that results in back pain later on, and that they can maybe change? Is it like, do you have some movements or some things that people do? It could be picking up something.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So here is a posture of a person coming in to a trainer, and they say, okay, you train me, I've got back pain. And the person is standing like this. So I'm going to ask you to hold the microphone here with this hand. And with this hand now, you're going to feel my back muscles right here. So if the viewers can see, he's just holding me, just go to the other side, right there. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to, do you see how those muscles are soft and they're off? Mm-hmm. And now the muscles are on, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I come into you and I'm standing like this, I'm crushing my back muscles and my back the whole time, just by the way I'm standing. But if you as a trainer can recognize, I've got to fix that posture first, stand up, They just shut down. So I don't need muscle relaxants because that's what the family doc would give you, a muscle relaxing pill. I just gave you the trainer just gave me the best muscle relaxant by getting my center of mass over my hips. Now watch, feel those back muscles again. Now I'm going to poke my chin. See how the muscles came on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now they're off. I'm going to round my shoulders. The muscles are on, they're off. So to build...
They're really hard when you're leaning forward and then they soften up.
So it's not a matter of pills. It's a matter of tuning the body just a little bit. Now you've shut down the muscles and you've taken away their muscular backache. So there would be a very quick example of a pattern that a poor trainer would start training this person and they would fail. They'd never get rid of their back pain. A good trainer would go through some postural awareness, teach the person, maybe do some so there's a time for a stretch. We might do a thoracic spine stretch. Just for example, just hold your hands behind your head like this, and now pull your elbows around, and now you're a tall one, but just push your elbows down into me, and then not too hard, that's too strong. There, we count to 10, 7, 8, 9, 10, relax, and I'm just going to pull you back. There, now do it again. And relax, and we do a few cycles of that. Now, put your arms down, and you'll find all of a sudden, oh, I'm a little more upright now. So do you see, just even that, I opened you up, and we actually got perfect, a better standing posture, and less load in your back. So there might be one example of how a little bit of tuning of a body can set you up for less pain. You're a tall dude, but over time you're going to find, when you're my age, you'll be starting to have this tendency. Do a few of those exercises and keep your body aligned, and you'll be less pained and more pain-free as you age. So there might be just one little example, tiny little example of what we might do. Is that for everybody? No, but when we guide the person, this guides the person through a self-assessment of their pain triggers, because going to the doc and getting a 10-minute appointment, you're guaranteed you won't get any insight. So the medical system is broken, and I'll say that, I'll stand by it. I don't care about the political flack.
Because they don't treat the healthy person, they treat the ones that already have a problem.
The only way you're going to solve back pain is to have a lengthier assessment and pay for it and understand precisely the pain triggers and then deal with them. But don't tell me that the pain is in the person's head. That just comes from a doc who doesn't have the expertise or time to assess the real pain triggers. So we're empowering the person to do it themselves. And they may get assists from their physios and their trainers and whatnot to do that.
By the way, because I just think of that, but as a biohacker, I'm focusing oftentimes on longevity. What, in your opinion, is, or according to your experience, is the sport that, say, not a non-athlete, someone who's just interested in physical activity, can do in order to really prolong the time where he has no problems with back?
That's a very complicated question. You're not realizing the complexity. For example, you can have what we would call the couch potato. I don't know if you have the same expression in Germany. So you might have a very heavy person who just sits on the couch all day. They never have back pain. It's so unfair. And then you have the person who they work at a computer 8 hours a day for their job, and then they go to the gym for an hour every day. But sitting at the computer for 20 minutes gives them back pain. And what they've done, it's interesting, we've never found sitting on its own to instigate the changes in the discs to cause pain. But if you sit for 8 hours and then you go and train and you do stupid things at the training center, like you'll do burpees, then you'll do multiple Olympic lifts, and then you'll do some sit-ups, you just softened the collagen, and then you loaded the collagen. You just created the perfect storm. So now sitting at the work for 20 minutes causes back pain. They would have been so much better to choose one. If they're going to create a bendable spine, you better not add too much heavy load. If you add a lot of heavy load, you've got to back off on the mobility. You cannot have it both ways. That's one of the trade-offs. If you don't, you won't tolerate sitting for 20 minutes. So if you know how to do it, the trick is in the programming. You have to pick some of your goals and stay with them a bit. So now your question you want a nice life, you want to live a long time, the answer is don't get into heavy athleticism, I'm afraid. Great athletes don't live very long. Your joints only have really so much to them. So all of this that I hear on the internet now of people trying to set their own personal bests and whatnot, I understand because I was young too. And I've been through all of that and heavy lifting, and I have joint replacement to prove it. But if you are just moderate and don't blend too much heavy lifting with a lot of mobility, you will be a happier 70-year-old keeping your own joints. So don't mess up your joints if you want to.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
No, thank you, because I think many people are not aware, and they're trying to stay fit, but with extreme measures.
Right. And
not realizing that later on, in 10 years from now, that might actually result in broken joints.
Those injuries and damage will accumulate, and they would have been a healthier 70-year-old had they not done it. So the trick now, it's interesting when you look at training goals through life. Of course, when you're a child, you're trying to develop movement skill, athletic skill, and general movement competency, of course. So you work on the variety of these athleticisms. Don't start a single sport too young. You know, the great basketball players, by nature, a tall man just takes longer to develop that beautiful basketball athleticism. So, do all kinds of other motor things, and you'll get a better basketball player in the end. So the best basketball players when they're 15 aren't the ones playing in the NBA.
Yeah.
They're the much longer to mature. But then when you're young and full of hormones and whatnot, I get it. You want to test yourself, and I get that. That's all part of growing up. But you also heal a lot faster. Then when you get to 40s and 50s, your job is to status quo. Be healthy. Do the things that you want to be able to do. Then you get to my age, I'm 60, my job now is I don't want to lose anymore. So I'm just doing just enough, because if I do too much, I get sore. If I do too little, I'm stiff and I lose my ability. So if I come here to teach for 8 hours, I've got to be fit to do that. So I have a fitness that allows me to teach and do these things that I do for 8 hours. When I'm 70 or 80, my training goal will be to reduce my biggest risk in life, and that's falling. So don't fall. I'll be doing more balance training, more hip power, more learning to get my foot out in front of me to arrest a fall should it occur, and that kind of thing. I won't be doing some of the crazy things that I see trainers taking a 70-year-old person and training them like they're 25. So to recognize that the goals change throughout the lifespan is the key to your question of what creates a good long life. It is a process that morphs and changes as your goals change.
Wow. This is actually one question now that I was asked to ask you by other trainers that want to step in your footsteps. And this is, and it could be a methodological thing. What is one thing that you would recommend your 30-year-old self now that you let's say start, and it could be anything from how you approach science or how you go about maybe your own routine in order to keep yourself healthy, but do you have maybe an advice for the trainers here?
They're going to be disappointed in that I don't, because I made a lot of the same mistakes as everybody does growing up. But when I look back on it, it was the mistakes who made me and what I've become today. So can I change anything and go back and redo it? Of course I can't, because that's all made who I am today. So I probably worked a little bit too hard. I was too passionate about becoming the master of this craft as I was younger, and I dedicated myself to that. Had I not done that, I wouldn't be able to be as comfortable as I am now in seeing backs and trying to guide them through to enjoying life a little bit more. So I really can't go back and change anything, but Do you remember that old movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Pumping Iron, and he said, you must always stay hungry, stay a little hungry. And as for some of the clients that I see, some of them are Hollywood people or prominent politicians. These people are running countries. And every single one of them is a high performance person. And what is common among all of them? And I think it's the ability to tolerate a little bit of discomfort. So you might be criticized. That's not comfortable. But you have to stay with what you know to be true, whatever those core values is or are. And it's that staying a little bit hungry, don't get too comfortable, work a little bit harder, deny yourself, I'd love to have 10 beers at night, but I can't because I won't perform tomorrow. I can't eat too much because I have to play a little bit to balance. So all of this is just through life. Don't get too comfortable. Stay a little bit hungry and keep progressing as best you can and find the balance somewhere and become a master of your craft.
Wow, I think this is an excellent way actually to also round this up. This is a wonderful last advice, because usually my last question is, what is the one message that you would like people to remember listening to this? And I think you just did it wonderfully already.
Yeah, become a master of your craft. Not too many people do that. I'll have a young person who think they're ready to go, and how did you do that again? And well, that just took me 30 years to develop the expertise that I just showed you, and then they think they're the master of it because I've shown them something in 10 minutes. And then they go on the internet and declare themselves the master. It's a crazy world.
It is now with the internet, because communication is just growing way faster, our methods of communicating, than anything else. So people are able to get their message across to everyone. Now, Stuart, where can people, other than your book, Rückenreparatur, and you can find that it's in German and in English, and you find it at Perform Better Europe and on Amazon, and but where else? Do you have a website that you want people to direct to?
Well, our website is backfitpro.com. And it's an international website, so you'll see the different flags of different nations if you're interested in, there's general information on there. There's quite a few videos and articles on general principles of training and back pain relief and selecting exercise and things like that. But there are my textbooks for clinicians and the lay public. There's a few videos on there. And then there are some devices that we've created, for example, some back supports. So I have to spend a lot of time on airplanes, and if you sit in an airplane seat, the lumbar section is actually scalloped out. So you're forced to sit like this, which is a disaster if you have to sit for 8 hours like that. Right. But if you can support that curve, you actually have balanced the hydraulics of the disc and made a much more resilient spine. So those pneumatic supports that you tune with a little inflatable bulb are on there. So little things like that can help certain people as well.
Very cool. Actually, I really can recommend this book, because in preparation for this interview now I went through it, and first of all, you can assess yourself and your back health, and you find really easy steps of what you can do in order to feel better and very quickly. And also one thing that caught my eye and that I was interested in was how you can improve your sexual positions as well. There's a little part on that.
Yeah, do you want a story on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's again so interesting. I have no interest in doing research on things that don't matter. I mean, some of my colleagues ask questions to get research grants and things like that, and I have no interest in that. My questions come from listening to people who have to fix problems. So if you talk to the average clinician, doesn't matter whether a doc or a trainer or a physio, they'll tell you, patients come to me and say, we had sex 3 months ago, it knackered our back so badly, we've been celibate ever since. Do you have some advice for us? There was no scientific guidelines at all out there. Wow. So I went to the ethics committee of the university and I said, The docs have no guidelines at all. This is a real problem. We need to study it. Even the president of the university got behind it and said, yes, this needs to be done, but obviously it's a very sensitive subject. It's got to be well done. So we couldn't take anyone from the university community. We had to recruit subjects, and your readers might find, or listeners might find this interesting. Where did we recruit subjects?
Right.
It turned out that we went to Latin dance schools.
Okay.
And those people were all very adventurous and were aware of their bodies and whatnot. So that's where we recruited a lot of our
Wow.
couples, and they had to have been in a long-term relationship and all that kind of thing. So it was very, from an ethical point of view, scientifically well done. But we had couples come in the lab, and they were instrumented, very sexy, covered in electrodes and lots of Velcro holding units on and whatnot. And we had them have sex with many different postures. And we were measuring spine load, hip load, what happens if you have a hip replacement and all this kind of thing. And as it turned out, the basic rules are the person on top is responsible for the motion. The person on the bottom is responsible to position their body in a resilient posture. And then if a person is triggered with spine flexion, we then show them techniques to avoid that pain trigger. If they're triggered in spine extension, so we created an atlas, and they've been published in various medical journals now. Mm-hmm. But I do give that away in the book as well. So things like that are real issues. Now the medical profession has scientific guidelines for their recommendations to their patients who trigger pain that way, how to select a mattress, what happens if you have kyphosis or stenosis, you're getting a bit older, some special conditions. But anyway, that's what we do. We listen. I'm criticized at home a little bit. Why would I go to a Perform Better meeting? They're not physical medicine doctors. I say, are you kidding? Those are the people who know movement better than any of you. And they're the ones on the front lines. When they ask me a question and I have to say, I don't know the answer to that, that's my next experiment. Their next experiment comes out of, what they have to do to get grant money. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't interest me. But I get the real questions and the questions that matter from working with people like you. So do you see why we need one another? You actually drive our research program. Right. And then I can come back in a couple of years and say, remember when I said I don't know 2 years ago? I know the answer now. And so that's...
There were more of your kind, more professors and doctors thinking like that.
Well, anyway, that's one of the joys of my life, to go and have a beer, which I'm listening all the time, what the problems are, and try and solve them that way.
Stuart, I think if people were still skeptical until now, I think now they're totally convinced that this is worth a read. Thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Max, can I say your interviewing style is beautiful. Nice, easy, conversational. You're really good at your job, so thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
Thanks.
And thanks to Perform Better. And we are out.